Welcome to our second webinar in the 2015 series on inclusive and resilient urban development. My name is Evgenia Mitroliou from the Resilient Cities team at the ICLEI World Secretariat in Bonn, Germany, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. For those of you who don't know about us, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, is an international membership organization for local governments around the world with over 1,000 members in 86 countries. We promote local action for global sustainability and support cities from our global, regional, and country offices with targeted programs and events. Every year, ICLEI convenes the Global Annual Forum on Urban Resilience and Adaptation to Climate Change, widely known as the Resilient Cities Congress. Next year, the Resilient Cities Congress will take place on the 6th to the 8th of July. Our webinars focus on a selection of key themes presented by international experts, which bridge conversations initiated at the Congress last year with new ideas, directions, and innovations in the run-up to Resilient Cities 2016. I would like to introduce you to my colleague Katja Müller from the ICLEI Capacity Center, who will shortly go through the technical details of this webinar platform with you. Katja, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Evgenia. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Also from my side, a warm welcome to this webinar. I just would like to give you some quick technical info. So in case you are not able to listen to the entire webinar, this is no problem, because we will share the webinar on the ICLEI YouTube channel, as well as on the Resilient Cities website. Also, I would like to draw your attention to the chat box at the bottom of the control panel. There's a little plus, you just click on it, and there you see a text box where you can type in all your questions that you have during the webinar, as well as any technical problems that you might have. And then I will try to help you with those. And questions on the webinar will be answered toward the end during the questions and answer session. Thank you very much. And now I hand back to Evgenia.
Thank you, Katja. In today's webinar, we will discuss urban resilience and informal settlements and focus on ways to achieve inclusive and resilient development in cities of the Global South. The webinar will highlight initiatives and lessons learned from Cape Town in South Africa and Makati City in the Philippines, where local authorities worked with representatives from informal settlements and slums to include them in their urban resilience plans. The examples focus on successful participatory approaches that directly include slum dwellers in resilience planning and implementation and create momentum for broader socioeconomic changes within the city. Today's agenda includes 3 presentations lasting approximately 30 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A. Violeta Seva will present a community development project in Makati City, where the local authorities work directly with the informal settlers on housing issues in order to reduce the settlers' vulnerability to disaster risks. Skye and Melanie will follow up by presenting the Know Your City campaign, an initiative that promises to bring the world of the urban poor into the digital area and push for the development of inclusive urban development strategies. Now, allow me to introduce our first presenter, Violeta Seva, who is the Senior Advisor to the Mayor of Makati City, Philippines, and simultaneously the General Secretary of Earthquakes and Megacities Initiative, a nonprofit organization that advances urban resilience through science and innovation. Violeta is a lawyer and urban planner by profession and has over 30 years of experience in managing the built environment, particularly Metropolitan Manila and its component local governments in Pasig, Quezon, and Makati City. She has also worked as a legal and institutional expert for Amman, Mumbai, and Dhaka in the past. Violeta spearheaded the establishment of several Makati City initiatives, including the Makati Disaster Risk Reduction and Management System, the Inclusive Mobility, and the Makati Risk-Sensitive Urban Redevelopment Project. Today, Violeta will introduce the Dreamville Community Development Project and discuss how the city has worked with the informal settlements on building resilience and adapting to climate change impacts. Violeta, go ahead when your presentation is ready. Violeta, can you hear us?
Greetings. Yes.
Perfect.
Greetings from Makati City to our participants. Today I'm going to speak about strengthening resilience of informal settlers through inclusive participatory community development. Many areas in the Philippines, including Makati, are exposed to natural hazards like typhoons, floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruption, tsunami, liquefaction, exacerbated by rapid urbanization coupled with this rise in informality and climate change. Makati City is pursuing resilience objectives with informal settlers, who we all know are the most vulnerable and severely affected sector because of the location and perhaps poor urban planning. Just a brief introduction about Makati. It's the financial center of the Philippines. It is a very compact city, just 27.36 square kilometers with a population of more than 500,000, but it balloons to about 2.3 to 3 million during the influx of workers and students who come to the city for business and for education. Makati City faces several hazards, both geologic and hydromet. The eastern part is transected by the West Valley Fault, and based on studies, the recent one, which is called the Greater Metro Manila Risk Analysis Project, a worst-case scenario of 7.2 magnitude earthquake is likely to hit Makati City, and it can experience an intensity 8 ground shaking. It is also prone to flooding. In this GMMA RAP study, a worst-case 200-year return period flooding could cause more than 3-meter flood level in areas near our city's bodies of water. Makati City resilience initiatives are anchored on the following legal, policy, and institutional framework. At the international level, we have the Yoga Framework of Action, and now the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Sustainable Development Goals, just recently adopted also, and of course, the recently concluded international agreement in COP21. We are also bound to follow our Philippine Constitution, which is the basic law of the land, the Local Government Code, Climate Change Act, Disaster Risk Reduction Act, and other laws. The national government has come up with climate change and disaster risk reduction frameworks and plans, which are supposed to be the guide for local government plans. Implementing rules and regulations are also passed by the executive department. We also have to reckon with Supreme Court decisions, like for instance, a continuing mandamus or an order from the Supreme Court for several agencies of government, like the Ministry of Interior and Local Government, and of course, local governments, to clear our waterways. It is the policy of the state to mainstream DRR and CCA in development planning processes, such as family policy formulation, socioeconomic development planning, budgeting, governance in such areas as health, education, environment, public infra, poverty reduction, land use, urban planning, and housing, among others. In the case of Makati, we have actually mainstreamed DRR-CCA into our risk-sensitive land use plan, zoning ordinance, our comprehensive development plan, local investment plan, and our annual investment programs. Prior to mainstreaming, of course, we did some kind of a self-assessment. where we utilized some tools that were developed by the UNISDR under its Making Cities Resilient campaign. And it's a tool called Local Government Self-Assessment Tool and Scorecard. So the results that came out of this self-assessment were considered when we prepared our local plans. When it comes to informality in Makati City, actually our informal settlements are not as big an issue unlike other cities. So as you notice, we only have about 4,000 households or families that we consider informal settlers that are occupying both public and private properties. How do we involve the informal sector in our DRR programs? Some of the programs wherein they are involved are the following. One, what we call the Community Organization and Empowerment Program, where they are engaged in community-based disaster risk reduction planning, hazard and risk planning, contingency planning, skills training such as camp management, health emergency management, first responders training, and drills. The other program is what we call the MSWD, Resettlement and Community Development Program, where we relocate informal settlers occupying government properties and danger zones. So one of the projects is what we call the Dreamville in San Jose del Monte. And this is the project that I'm going to focus on later. The other program is our intensive DRR, is our DRRM information education program, where we raise the level of awareness of our people and preparedness in times of disasters. So we have what we call the Mobile Knowledge Resource Center, which is an awareness raising project supported by JICA, and also some partnership with our Philippine Commission on the urban poor for disaster preparedness and awareness seminars. We also engage with the private sector, the business sector in particular, because as you see, Makati City is the financial and the business district in the Philippines, so we have a lot of tall buildings, and we really have to engage them as well. In other parts of Makati, we do have pockets of informality, but they all are part of our IEC program. The other one is what we call community building program, whereby we strengthen neighborhoods and link them to potential partners. Actually, this program does not only include informal settlers, but include the formal sector also. So it's like it's really a very good and inclusive planning for both formal and informal settlers. We will take a look later on how perhaps those informal settlers who are within formal communities would be integrated into community development. So let us now focus on this Dreamville Project. What is Dreamville Project? It is a resettlement and inclusive resilient community development project that is developed by the city government of Makati with the IS and private sector partners such as Gawad Kalinga, Meralco, Caritas, Rotary Club, Holcim, and others, together with the host local government of San Jose del Monte. It is located in San Jose del Monte, an adjoining province in Bulacan, on a 32 square meter land, and is currently occupied by 412 households. The project observes seven pillars of resettlement, namely strong community organizing, participatory governance, access to market and livelihood, gender sensitivity, ecological sustainability, food security, health, hygiene, sanitation, all leading towards sustainable, inclusive community resilience. In this project, the IS were provided with free use of lots and provision of the dwellings. And these were, as you can see in this picture, while construction is going on, you can see here some of the residents participating in actual construction where they're supposed to contribute 700 hours of sweat equity. The cost of the materials and were solicited from private sector by Gawad Kalina. So on the right side, you will see now the structure that is finished. The resettlement process is as follows, no? Where all the IS are involved in. Number one would be census tagging, which is undertaken by our MSWD, or the Social Welfare Department. And then social preparation, where we have a local interagency committee that meets with the IS. It's composed of national agency representatives like Housing Authority, Presidential Commission on Urban Poor, our National Police, Interior Local Government, our city departments, and barangays. They meet 3 times, you know, as a way of, or a platform for dialogue with the IS. There's also an actual resettlement site visit that takes place. So IS are brought to potential relocation sites, those that are managed by the city and those that are managed by the national government. The IS can select from an assistance package. How many are these? There's about four choices. 1, relocation in Makati-owned projects such as Dreamville. So they have free use of the lot, and there's provision of free housing, there's cash financial assistance, and food assistance. The second one is socialized housing projects by national government, where they have to pay an amortization. The third one is, balik probinsya, which means they would want to return to their provinces, then they're provided financial assistance. And finally, if they want to transfer just within Metro Manila, then they're also provided financial assistance. The last one, of course, would be the actual resettlement and continuing support by Makati of support services like medical, livelihood programs, trainings, and the like. Community participation is institutionalized through various associations that were created in Dreamville. So you have the Homeowners Association, Senior Citizens, Parents, Youth, Livelihood Project Team, Consumer Cooperative, and Non-Motorized Transport Associations. These are some of the livelihood projects that are currently being implemented. CashforWork, where the residents 18 years and above can work, and they are paid minimum wage for instance, declogging operations and maintenance of the village. There's also what we call FoodforWork. Instead of cash, they're provided with groceries or goods in payment for their services. Rice for Work, the same scheme. So instead of cash, they're paid rice, which are donated again from the private sector. You know, rice is a staple food of Filipinos, so it's really a basic necessity for our families. There's also this Communal Gardening Livelihood Project, whereby an unutilized land are provided the residents, and whoever participates partakes of the sale of harvest, and they divide it among themselves. Another one is a rug making livelihood project for our women. And finally, we have this nail care training, also for young women, because they they find time to beautify themselves. So they are taught how to do it. It's an additional income for them. Holcim, which is a cement corporation, has also provided some training for the male constituency for skills training on construction. So as you can see in this picture, we have male residents who have contributed sweat equity. This is their counterpart. If they do not contribute this, then they are not eligible to avail of the free dwellings. There are also spiritual and values formation seminars for the residents. So what were the lessons learned in the implementation of the Dreamville Project? Number one, informal settlers are receptive and participative in providing relevant inputs in the design of our DRRCCA policies and programs, provided that there is an enabling environment for them to be able to, air or voice their ideas. Number two, a comprehensive inclusive community development program that is designed together with them ensures sustainability of community-based initiatives. Thirdly, we see that social preparation is indeed a necessary ingredient for buy-in of these informal settlers for resettlement programs which keep them out of danger zones. For instance, when Typhoon Ketsana occurred in 2009, informal settlers who were already moved out from danger zones in Makati to Dreamville were spared of the impacts of Typhoon Ketsana. Finally, developing partnerships with the private sector, the host local government provides additional resources and helps us identify strategies, sound strategies and best practices for resilient community development. What are the next steps of the city in cooperating with informal settlers? For now, we still have remaining IS in the city, about 4,000 of them. So we shall be intensifying our IEC programs for them to be able to really, appreciate the programs of the city for, keeping them safe from harm. Number two, we have to explore affordable in-city housing. Our current administration is seriously looking into in-city relocation for the remaining informal settlers in the city. Number three, optimizing partnership with the different organizations and perhaps looking for more partners. Fourth is continuous training on livelihood programs, value formation, not only for those in Dreamville and other relocation sites, but also those who are in the city right now. Finally, intensifying monitoring of new or re-entering informal settlers. There is a Ministry of Interior Local Government directive which orders our local governments, particularly barangay officials, to prevent the proliferation of ISFs in the city. This is my last slide, and it's a testimony of a relocatee who used to be a former resident in Makati. Translating it into the English language, She says that here in Dreamlandville, somehow our lives have improved significantly. We help each other and live in a safe and peaceful community. We thank the continuous assistance of Makati City, for they have not left us behind. And these are the words of Maricon Cabrero, a resident of Block 7, Dreamlandville, San Jose del Monte, Bulacan. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Violeta. A reminder to all the attendees, you may type in any questions you have for the presenters during their presentations, so we can read them out at the end at our Q&A. We will now move to our second and third speakers, Skye Dobson and Melanie Manuel, who are presenting both from Cape Town. Skye Dobson is an urban development professional with close to 10 years of experience working in East African cities. Skye is currently the Deputy Manager at the Slum Dwellers International Secretariat in Cape Town. Slum Dwellers International is a global network of slum dweller federations spanning over 30 countries. The network operates from the premise that organized communities of the urban poor are central to the generation of inclusive and sustainable cities. Prior to her current role, Skye was the Executive Director of Act Together Uganda, a supporting NGO to the National Slum Dwellers Federation of Uganda. Skye has published a selection of articles on her work in Uganda, which have appeared in publications produced by the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED, as well as a selection of newspaper. Today, she will introduce us to the Know Your City campaign, a global campaign to collect and consolidate city-wide data on slums by residents for the settlements as the basis for inclusive development between the urban poor and local governments. She will explain how this tool can be used to benefit these communities and the local governments involved. Together with Skye today is Melanie Manuel. We are very delighted and privileged to have Melanie with us today, presenting the voice of the urban poor communities. Melanie is a community leader and provincial coordinator of the Informal Settlement Network in the Western Cape and provides social facilitation on development projects to informal settlements and backyarder communities. Melanie has been a community leader for over 15 years and resides in Manenberg, Cape Town, where she serves at the Manenberg Coordinating Structure, is the chairperson of the Manenberg Steering Committee for Violence Prevention through Upgrading, and the Mayoral Urban Regeneration Program. She is also the chairperson of the Housing Steering Committee and belongs to a local savings scheme of the Federation of the Urban Poor. Following Skye's introduction of the Know Your City campaign, Melanie will share experiences working with the local authorities and highlight the importance of participating in resilience initiatives for people living in informal settlements. So Skye and Melanie, please go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, everybody. This is Skye. Thank you very much to the organizers and also to Violeta for that excellent presentation. I'm here with Melanie and we're going to present together. So, yeah, we're going to get started. So, SHAC, or Slum Dwellers International, is an organization, a network of urban poor organizations in about 33 countries. So, when we talk about resilience, the reason why SDI thinks that resilience is such a key issue for informal dwellers is the fact that 1 in 7 people worldwide are living in these informal settlements. So the question that we pose is, can we really talk about mitigating the effects of climate change and building global resilience if we don't talk about resilience in these informal settlements and slums throughout the global south? Obviously, the answer for SDI is that we don't think that that is possible. We think that these will be a key location for the struggle to build resilience globally. SDI supports federations and organized urban poor communities in 33 countries, as I said. And within these countries, there are over 1 million slum dwellers organizing in about 450 cities. Key to this organization is to partner with government in order to build the inclusive cities that we seek bit by bit. We know that this is a long-term struggle. Before we start, we often reflect with the community leaders from throughout the network about the fact that sort of this new term, resilience building, is being thrown around, and climate change mitigation. And if you ask community members about this using those terms, they might try to sort of fit their work into a new language, and then it doesn't really seem very authentic, and it seems like you're just speaking sort of NGO speak, if you will. There was one Federation member who told us recently that communities have been doing these things before these words were invented. So we thought that was a pretty powerful statement about the work that communities do to build resilience, because it's actually what they're doing on a day-to-day basis in their communities, and certainly what organized communities are working to do. So when we try to reflect with Federation leaders from around the network, we try to just always bring it back to what is it that we're trying to do in our communities, and then see how this contributes to resilience, rather than sort of getting things back to front. That's what our little picture here shows. We don't want people just prattling off statements like we organize in order to mitigate harmful effects of climate change. We want to be a bit more authentic and frank about what it is we're doing day to day and how this contributes to resilience. So thankfully today, as we were introduced, we have a community leader from South Africa here. So instead of getting her to do a very technical presentation about resilience, first we're going to hear about what it is that these communities are doing on a day-to-day basis and have been for well over 20 years.
Hi everybody, my name is Melanie Manuel, and once again thanks for the opportunity. So basically what informal settlement basically does within the federations is to organize slums, or to organize informal settlements by bringing them together under one roof and saying, what are your needs? What is the issues that you are basically struggling with? So to build a network of different informal settlements, whether it be on a local level, city level, national level, or even an international level, is understanding what the needs basically is of the informal settlements. That will be done and identified through a profile and enumeration, which is basically collecting data, information of what is existing in the informal settlement, or the enumeration data of how many people is living there, what are the issues, for example, how many elderly, how many children, how many sick, what type of services is it that you need. So by doing the profile is understanding basically about water and sanitation, and seeing basically how do they take that to a further process where they can actually sit and negotiate with the state or the municipality or the city, which is the government, by saying this is what their needs are. And because the profile gives you of information of how many years they have been there in existence, just imagine living for 9 years, having 14 chemical toilets, of which 7 is working, and 2 taps for 570 people. And government doesn't know that. But whereby communities gather their own information and use it as a tool to negotiate with government by saying, this is what our needs are. Further, we realize by going to government, government just pushes you away, because they've had this free-for-all scenario where they will just give toilets, not consult, not plan, and just do what they want to do. So now communities within informal settlements or informal settlements actually became very clever by saying, how do they use this as a tool basically to help them? So they started this women collective savings where they said, let's save for what our daily needs are, whether it be water and sanitation, or whether it just be the 3 F's, which is floods, fires, and food security, which is a huge problem within informal settlements. So they will use their money in order to leverage that funds with the state by saying, can you provide us with infrastructure, which is all part of the water and sanitation, and we will assist ourselves in looking at top structure. So jointly through the process that the informal settlements has done, because they're very much organized, they understand what is existing and what their needs basically is. They look at different types of projects in order to help them. So by identifying the projects, it's very easy to negotiate when communities know what they want. And when they say nothing for us without us, it's how do communities set up saying we don't want to be consulted, but we want to participate. How do we plan collectively? How do we actually look at eradicating our fires and our floods? And how do we look at livelihood projects which will assist our food security needs? And this is basically done through a process where it follows, where women comes together and say, we want to help ourselves. We might be poor, but we are not hopeless. How do we actually build different types of partnerships with governments and different other stakeholders by saying, let's look at our holistic plan for our settlement and let's work towards that.
Thank you very much, Melanie. So you might have picked up on one of the things that Melanie was talking about there, the profiling and the enumeration. This has been going on in the federation since they were founded, the first federation being in India. So the profiling and enumeration has been going on for a very long time, but over the last 2 years, we've sort of had a bit of a rebranding around the Know Your City campaign. So this has been quite an effective campaign at getting the attention of international development partners and governments at the city and the national level, just to sort of say, how can you plan for your city if you don't know the conditions of around 60% of the population? So in order to know your city, you need current information. You need not information from a census that was conducted perhaps 10 years ago, or in Uganda at the last, which is where I used to work, as you said. The census had not been carried out for about 12 years, I think, because of a lack of funding. So how can a capital city plan for its population when you don't have this kind of information? So a key part of the work of the federations across the network is to do this profiling and enumeration to gather data on informal settlements. And like Melanie said, this work is carried out by the community members themselves. The benefits of having the community members themselves gather this information is, one, that they can access informal settlements more than an outsider could. They're more trusted by the communities in which they're gathering data, so there's a bit less likelihood that answers will be tailored to suit a certain agenda. But most importantly, the process of profiling an entire city with hundreds of informal settlements organizes a community in a way that is very powerful, so that once they have that information, they really have the capacity to use it in the most effective way through negotiating with partners, as Melanie was saying, particularly government, around services and around upgrading. So this little diagram here, this was just some profiling work that had been going on in the previous week in Kasubi Market in Kampala City. It was a partnership between the Kampala Capital City Authority and the Federation in Uganda. The survey also included a biometric component to ensure that the data was as accurate as possible and that beneficiaries of a planned relocation would be well accounted for. So you can find out more about the Know Your City work at our knowyourcity.info website, which is constantly being updated with the information from various federations. So very quickly, this is a bit of a joke, but a bit serious also. So we said that now we've heard what Melanie was talking about, what federations do, what community organizations in the SDI network do. Now, how can we sort of put that into the translator and come up with what it means for resilience? So one thing that Melanie didn't mention, but if we have time later, she can talk a bit about it. There are, once the communities save and like she said, use these savings to leverage other resources. Part of that leverage can come from community upgrading funds. These funds combine savings of the community with government funding and donor funding. So what this represents in the resilience building lingo is this blending of finance and blending of funds to build urban resilience, which we hear quite a lot about. So this is something that is already being done by federations as part of their incremental upgrading approach. We have building materials workshops. We're going to show you some pictures here. A lot of the federations, just like we saw those community members in Philippines doing, they're producing their own building materials, and these materials have a low carbon footprint. Things like interlocking bricks, which require very minimal cement, which, as we know, has to be transported over long distances and is very expensive for the urban poor. Then they're also making biodigester toilets and prefabricated slabs and all kinds of things that have a low carbon footprint because they're being made on site also. The in-situ slum redevelopment, which we were happy to hear that the Philippines cities, including Makati, are looking at. This really is essential to improving urban spatial efficiency, which then contributes obviously to city resilience when you can sort of tighten up the transport and service needs of your city. The incremental sanitation upgrades that our federations are doing all over the network promotes resilience to flooding and disease and also to the disaster risk reduction. And of course, this Know Your City campaign that we've been talking about, we really think is central to inclusive planning, because not only because you're planning for the part of the city for which there was previously very little data, but also because the people in that part of the city are participating in the process of generating those plans. And because of this participation, actual participation, not just consultation, we believe that this creates the robust partnerships between local authorities and slum dwellers that is necessary for building these inclusive cities. So really quickly, before Melanie tells you a story about one of their exceptional projects in South Africa, just this is a little small presentation of a few projects in the network. You can see the communal toilet constructed. Oftentimes the individual toilets are too expensive for informal settlement dwellers in many countries, and so they've built communal facilities as part of their incremental upgrading agenda. And they're constructed by the community themselves. This massive 3-story building was also constructed using the interlocking bricks that I was telling you about. It's a community hall and a training center for youth in the building of construction materials and how to design buildings and whatnot. You'll see the youth there on the bottom right, who were involved in the training and who are on site daily. And even in some municipalities now, this picture on the bottom left, the federations are being hired by the councils, the municipal councils, to construct public facilities because of the reputation that they've gained from the work that they're doing. So now Melanie is going to show us a bit about a project in Cape Town called Flamingo Crescent.
So informal settlement upgrade reblocking, and people ask, what is reblocking? For years, government has been saying that they cannot put in any water and sanitation because the settlement is very dense and there's no space. So now communities and leaders have become very clever by saying, let's actually start reconfiguring our structures so that we can actually open up the space. One, to open up access roads where the fire brigade or ambulance can basically enter. But more, let's open up space where we can have our own toilets. So this project called Flamingo Crescent is situated in an industrial area where it was just a relocation site where the city took off people from the streets living under the bridges and just dumped them there and said that they will be housed in the next 3 months. So 11 years later, the settlement actually grew much larger than what it used to be. So 104 families basically now share this space in an industrial area where trucks, heavy trucks and a lot of cars drive down the street. So many accidents has happened. Many fires, they've lost quite a few children within the settlement. So the settlement actually came to us as an alliance and said, how can they basically be assisted? Using their own material that they just gathered, which was plastic and small bits and pieces of wood, and they just put the structure together. And they didn't have a plan on how do we actually build a structure or how do we actually plan. So coming to the alliance and working a lot with the settlement is basically saying, how do they actually start reconfiguring their settlement? So by us supplying them with the technical support, they actually planned their own settlement and they did their own layout. So by them doing their own design, they understood exactly what it is that they wanted and what it is that the need of the community is. Having the 2 taps, like I said earlier on, that serviced 500 plus people, where there was a long queue, they realized that they couldn't do this anymore. And they said to themselves, they're poor, they are not hopeless. They then started doing a savings, women's savings scheme, and then they understood that they have to save because things doesn't come for free. But by them understanding how much money they had to save for, they had to do their own costing. They actually, because they have the design, they know how many units they needed of structures, they actually did their own costing, and out of the costing, they realized what amount of money they needed. With the money that they had, they could easily set up a meeting with the city of Cape Town and say to them, this is how much money they have for their top structure. But this is basically what they need in order to look at the infrastructure and the rest of the services, in which they then leverage 2.2 million from the city of Cape Town, and they only saved 90,000 rand. So 90,000 rand leveraged them quite a large sum of money. So the 2.2 million rand then went into putting in the roads, stormwater drains, the toilets, and the electricity, because they never had any of those. So you can see the before picture and the after picture. But the fundamental from this project is where basically the community themselves did the development. Even though the city paid for the infrastructure and had a contractor, the contractor was forced to use the local labor, which is part of our skills development. So the community was part of the construction work, and they did everything themselves, in which now they are actually a learning center where they can teach other informal settlements how to do what they have done. The city's policy is 5 toilets for 1 family, but because the settlement leaders, they were so strong, they could negotiate for the one-on-one toilet, based on extracting the enumeration information, whereby 95% of the settlement it's not healthy. They suffer from HIV, AIDS, and TB, and so on, and they could not share a toilet. So them realizing that they needed to negotiate, they did so. But then further on, 98% of the community is unemployed, and people asked, where did they get their money from? So when you have a need, it actually pushes you basically to go out of your way to get that little bit of money so that it changes the way you live and the way you think. But this wasn't the end of the project. Remember, a lot of our times we are spent by changing the mindsets of people. According to the South African Constitution, they are waiting for the adequate house to arrive. And people question, why do we have to move from a shack to another shack? But it's how to change the way you live into a better way while you are waiting for your adequate house to come. So the changing of the mindsets also is another process whereby communities now have to understand we cannot wait for government to come because it might take another 30 years. But how do we change our living conditions whilst we are waiting? So now that they have changed, it doesn't mean that upgrading stops. Because after reblocking, what next? Now that they actually played the hand of the government by saying that they can live there, they have some sort of tenure of security. Now they can actually look at what type of other developments can we do in the settlement. Now that there are proper services. And this is a challenge within all informal settlements whereby they are all looking at how do we reblock our settlement. But it's not about looking at the top structure, it's basically about opening up spaces. Just a bit of reconfiguring so that we can look at the water and sanitation and at other infrastructures. But it's how do we restore dignity to the poor that has been taken away for them for many years, but also how do we build unity and solidarity amongst the poor where they can actually teach and train other informal settlements what they have done through different types of exchanges. One will be through savings, designing, mapping, the others will be through construction and so on. But the fundamental part of this process is how do you build partnerships so that you can continue to upgrade your settlement, because your informal settlement doesn't stop only at this picture that you see on the after section. But how do you get street names? How do you get posts delivered to your informal settlement? So this is the first informal settlement within South Africa where you have a proper road and you can actually have posts delivered to you. Thank you.
That was excellent, and it is the last slide in our presentation. But I think something that was just really struck me with what Melanie was saying, which I think is important in this resilience discussion, is that the hard infrastructure needs to be complemented by the soft infrastructure, the community structures. If we're really going to talk about resilience, we can put in infrastructure, but unless there's that soft infrastructure of community organization and sometimes a shift in mindset, like Melanie was saying, those drainages will get full of garbage, toilets won't be maintained, all those kinds of things. So that was a point I just wanted to raise from what Melanie said. Now we will stop showing our screen and proceed to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Skye and Melanie. This was a very interesting presentation. We're running a little bit out of time here, so I will just have time to ask a couple of questions. First of all, I would like to kick off with a question from Jan Wolf, who is asking Skye, Dobson, and Melanie about the Know Your City campaign. And it says, what have been the local authorities' reception of the map tool? Has there been any disagreement of the number of size informal settlements in cities? And if so, how do you settle such disagreements?
So thank you very much for the question. It's very different from country to country in terms of the reception from the local authorities. Because I was in Uganda for such a long time, I'll give an example from Uganda just to share. Because the census had not been in place for such a long time, the city itself was frustrated by a lack of data. And when at the time that they had some German consultants come to the city to try to plan for sanitation that would serve the urban poor, they realized how little up-to-date data they had. So the city itself actually referred these consultants to us to get data to support their research. So in that way, it's been quite well received. In terms of the data itself, it's always a learning process, and some data is questioned. At that point, the authority and the federation will engage in a verification exercise to ensure that the information was valid, but it's a constant dialogue and partnership, so the community and the local authorities are quite often working together throughout the gathering and analysis phase. Perhaps Melanie can add from her experience here quickly.
I think it's more when communities are or leaders are capacitated to understand what the needs are and using the enumeration data to extract the analysis according to the need and then understanding what the process is and what the next step is. It's easy for them to negotiate with different stakeholders, including the three spheres of government, but including negotiating with the NGOs, because now they understand what the needs are and the full importance of the whole process and exercise is really understanding your settlement and understanding your city, knowing what is existing and how you can enhance, but where you also extract from in order to better your settlement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We have another question from Nidhi Mittal for Skye and Melanie. Given that each slum is unique in the size and circumstances, what's the scalability or replicability potential for the example shared by Melanie across South Africa?
I think what our plan is to replicate and scale up what we are doing. And I think it is how do we build strong relationships and partnerships with our government in order to really go to scale with what we are doing. Within South Africa, we have 4 different regions which are looking at upgrading. But it also depends on the settlement, how ready are they in order to accept what projects are basically coming or how do we basically enhance. But I think a lot of our challenges, especially when it comes to know your city, is we have politics that plays a very big role, and especially like this time of the year when it's coming to election time, how different politicians play each other up, which makes it difficult on the ground. But I think our plan is for 2016 even is to replicate and go to scale with what we are doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be blocking. It can be just a normal layout. We look at different types of projects. We build community centers, we assist with community centers, just normal water and sanitation, just putting in toilets or electricity. So it's our projects vary according to the need that has been extracted from the enumeration. But the plan and the aim is really to go to scale. But how do we make our government understand what our projects and what our process is about? Because the process is more important that we actually sell to government so that they can take in and that they can support.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have a question now for Violetta from Diane Archer, who is asking, were houses in Dreamlandville and other relocation sites designed and built with resilience to future storms and typhoons and earthquakes in mind? Violetta, can you hear us?
Are you?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
The relocation sites that were purchased by the city government are located in safe places. So, like for instance, in San Jose del Monte, while you know the resettlement area is near a creek, the site development plan took into account if ever there's going to be overflowing of water coming from the creek, those have been taken into account. And so for the past few years, it has never experienced severe flooding in the area. The same is true with the other site in Calauan.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question? Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you very much. There's another question for Skye and Melanie from Fritz Nuzier. They're asking, how do you find a new location for the slum relocations?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? A relocation what?
How do you find a new location for the relocations, the slum relocations?
So when we do an upgrade, we don't relocate people out of the settlement. We always keep them within the settlement and relocate them in the settlement instead of taking them out. One thing we realize is that we disadvantage people when we relocate them out of the settlement. we don't want to disempower communities where they make their livelihoods or where they make a living for themselves, because we know that the unemployment rate is very high. People cannot find a job. So they make themselves a living where they are residing. So by doing a project such as the reblocking, we don't relocate outside of the settlement, we relocate them in the settlement by putting them in a different cluster, because the settlement will be divided up into clusters. But it's also part of the strategy of, you know, communities now starting to unite and getting to know each other. So it's just not only hosting each other. If there is no space within the informal settlement, for example, a lot of the informal settlements is built on a road reserve where government will say they don't have a plan now, but in the next 5 years, you know, that settlement needs to be relocated. What we always say is, you know, why relocate informal settlements once there's already services that has been implemented? So we will assist the communities in negotiating with states. But relocation for us isn't the first best bet. If it is a need, obviously we will have to look for suitable land where communities can do something in order to build that settlement the way they want it to be. But our process is how do we build in our process where we say that relocation will be the last thing on our list.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
Thank you, Melanie. That is interesting, because that is exactly in Makati City there has been a relocation, and so your question before towards Violeta was, are all resettlements the result of disaster vulnerability?
Am I supposed to answer that now?
Yes, if you can.
Yes, you know, there were studies in the past that have shown that that identified danger zones. So these are usually areas along the river banks, creeks and esteros, and areas where potential for liquefaction is high. So there's really a basis for identifying these danger areas. And mostly the land that is occupied are public in nature. And these are, you know, what we call public easements. It can be 3 meters from the river bank or 10 meters from the river bank. So really it's non-negotiable, meaning to say that you know, people cannot continue living in such areas because of the danger posed by flooding or liquefaction, for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We have a lot of interesting questions here, but we're unfortunately running out of time. So if we have not got to your question, we'll be able to forward the questions to the speakers after the session and get them answered for you. So I would like to thank everyone who has participated today, especially Violeta, Skye, and Melanie for sharing their thoughts and experiences with us today, and for everyone who has been attending and engaging with us in this discussion. As we have already mentioned in the beginning, we have been recording this webinar, and it will be made available on our Resilient Cities series website shortly, together with the presentations, further resources, and links for your information. There you can also check forthcoming webinars, as well as past webinar recordings, and download relevant material. Lastly, I would like to remind you about our open call for contributions for next year's Resilient Cities Congress, which will be held 6th to 8th of July 2016 in Bonn, Germany. The call closes on January 8th, that's roughly 3 weeks from now. And one of our key Congress themes for Resilient Cities 2016 is inclusive and resilient urban development, so please submit your contributions soon to shape the Congress next year in this meaningful direction. With that, I would like to conclude this webinar, and thank you all for joining us from different parts of the world, and have a good day or evening.